Hello, dear friends. Welcome to Indigo Sangha. Lovely to see you all. And here we are together for, yes, happiness. Here we are together for our second installment of the Sutra, Knowing the Better Way to Catch a Snake. I am very much looking forward to this evening. I'd like to have this evening us begin with a sitting meditation, and then we'll do walking meditation, and then we're going to jump into the sutra again. And I don't do that lightly. I do know how important our second sit is. I look forward to it as well. But this evening I want to be sure and save enough time for our Dharma sharing, because this is a sutra of quite a bit of substance. So why don't we go ahead and find our posture. Feel your feet on the floor. Feel the weight of your body and your seat on your chair. Relax your hands and your arms. Bring the crown of your head upright. Bring your shoulders down and relaxed back. Feel the strength of your spine. And we'll begin by enjoying 3 sounds of the bell. For those of us who will be walking during this period of walking meditation, let's be very mindful of our feet upon the earth, the shifting of our weight, and the miracle that is the opportunity to be able to walk. So last week, you'll recall that we opened the Sutra on the better way to catch a snake with the reading of it. And you'll recall that Bhikshu Arata was going around claiming that sense pleasures are not an obstacle to the practice, and that many of the monastics were quite concerned about this. They talked to him many times. They went to the Buddha. They said, Bhikshu, Arahat, who is not complying with your teachings? And the Buddha said, have him come and speak with me. And so he did. And the Buddha said, are you telling people that sense pleasures are not an obstacle to the practice? And he said, yes, I am. And he said, well, you're not correct. And sense pleasures are an obstacle to the practice. You have misunderstood my teachings, and you are presenting to other people the opposite of my intentions. And this slander is bringing harm to yourself and to others. So you all recall that much, I'm sure, that were able to be with us last week. We had a number of reactions to this, including myself. The first time I read it was, gosh, Buddha, don't be telling me what to think and what to do. And for heaven's sakes, don't take the joy out of life. Sense pleasures can be wonderful. And so with a little bit deeper looking, we realized, with Thai's guidance, that there was a nuance here, that sense pleasures can be an obstacle to the practice. And we know this from like the 5 mindfulness teachings that tell us not to run after wealth, fame, power, and sensual pleasures. They tell us, aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconducts, I'm committed to cultivating responsibility when it comes to my sexuality. The mindfulness trainings tell us to participate in mindful eating, drinking, and consuming, that we are determined not to gamble or use alcohol, drugs, or any other products which contain toxins, that include websites, electronic games, TV programs, films, magazines, books, and conversations. So these sense impressions can indeed lead to obstacles. They can indeed be problematic. We learn about the middle path to be sure that they're not problematic. And we also know that in this sutra, Arata bowed his head. He was hurt when the Buddha said this. He was upset and he could think of nothing to say. Now, I find this such a rich beginning to this sutra because, Dave and I were speaking after the Sangha and we were kind of laughing because I think it's written in such a way that you kind of are cheering for Arata. Doggone, they're being rough on him. And it gives us the experience of misunderstanding the Buddha's teaching right from the beginning. We know that, I have heard Thai say it, and I've heard other teachers, I witnessed other teachers do this as well, that when a student asks a question, well, 2 students can ask the very same question on different days and get completely different answers. And the reason why is that the teacher hears not only the words of the question, but he hears the spirit of the question. There is a background to the question. There is an energy in the question that the teacher is responding to. So if you or I were to go to the Buddha and say, Buddha, isn't it true that we can be nourished by watching the sunset, by a good meal, by taking in the beauty of a calm lake, that this is part of the nourishment and wonder of life? And the Buddha could say, well, yes, that is true. That is how we find joy and happiness in the present moment. So if we ask about sense impressions and sense perceptions in that way, of course, they're vital to our practice of mindfulness in the present moment. But this particular monastic had been walking around and telling people that our sense pleasures are not an obstacle. So we don't know what he was doing, but we do know that other monks told him to stop. And so many ways we can think of the start of this sutra as an intervention. Stop saying this. This is not what the Buddha is teaching. And this, when it comes to picking up a snake, we really have to be careful. If the Dharma, the teachings are like a snake, we have to be careful how we grasp the teachings so that we're conveying the letter and the spirit of the Dharma in doing so. And what's really interesting about this sutra is that it's not going into what specifically he was doing about these sense perceptions or what he was saying, because the sutra is actually not about that. The sutra is not about the whether or not sense perceptions are an obstacle or not. The sutra, the main purpose is to demonstrate the necessity of breaking the bonds of our attachment to our views. It's about breaking the bonds of attachment to our views. So we know this because Arata did not get up and storm out. He was in his community and he was looking deeply at what his attachment had been to these views. And we also know this because the second simile that the Buddha uses, the first simile is about, how we catch a snake and using some skill in how we pick up the Dharma, if the Dharma is a snake. The second simile is the raft that brings us to the other shore. And what I'd like to do is share my screen, and I'm wondering if I could have 2 volunteers, maybe people who don't normally read. Just raise your hands and there'll be little sections of this to read. I have it broken out for the first reader and the second reader. Do I have 2 volunteers this evening? Thank you, Deborah. You'll be the first reader. Dave, you'll be the second. Okay. So I'll share my screen here. I hope you can see that. And Deborah, if you want to go ahead and just unmute yourself, and you'll be reader 1, and then Dave, you'll be reader 2.
Bhikshu, I have told you many times the importance of knowing when it is time to let go of a raft and not hold on to it unnecessarily. When a mountain stream overflows and becomes a torrent of floodwater carrying debris, a man or woman who wants to get across might think, what is the safest way to cross this floodwater? Assessing the situation, she may decide to gather branches and grasses, construct a raft, and use it to cross to the other side. But after arriving on the other side, she thinks, I spent a lot of time and energy building this raft. It is a prized possession and I will carry it with me as I continue my journey. If she puts it on her shoulders or head and carries it with her on land, Bhikshu, do you think that would be intelligent?
The Bhikshu replied, no, world-honored one. The Buddha said, how could she have acted more wisely? She could have thought, This raft helped me get across the water safely. Now I will leave it at the water's edge for someone else to use in the same way. Wouldn't that be a more intelligent thing to do? The bhikshus replied, yes, world honored one. Buddha taught, I have given this teaching on the raft many times to remind you how necessary it is to let go of all the true teachings, not to mention teachings that are not true.
Thank you very much. So we are to let go of all the true teachings. And you can also substitute the word dharma. We're to let go of all of the dharmas, not to mention the dharmas that aren't true. This idea of the teachings of the dharmas that are not true, you can also say it as those teachings that are received in the wrong way, or that are in and of themselves non-teachings. So there are ways of communicating that are unskillful. They're not being heard, they're being misunderstood. And we need to be careful to let those go, as well as those teachings that we do understand and that we do hear correctly. This is the lion's roar, it is said, to give up our habit of clinging. And we need to give up and let go of this habit of clinging to the teachings on impermanence, on no self or emptiness, on nirvana, because what the Buddha is trying to say here is that these are all simply skillful means. They're all ways of getting us to be liberated from our suffering. They are not theories that we can hold on to. If we hold on to them like theories, then we don't have any relief from our pain or our ability to understand the letter and the spirit of the teaching is undermined because we're clinging to it. So we have to be careful not to be caught in the form of what we're studying, because we'll miss the substance of what is intended. I have a colleague that many years ago I had the opportunity to work with. I didn't know her that well. She's a wonderful woman. And she lived out in the countryside, and every day she took the same route to work. And she was wanting to turn left onto the country highway. And she looked left and she looked right and she drove onto the lane and she got slammed by a truck and was killed. And I just know, from the people that I spoke with, that she was this very good driver who always looked both ways. She had the form of driving down, but she missed the substance of the oncoming truck, and it took her life. So in Buddhism, we know that some people fall in love with the form, and it stimulates the intellect. And there can be all kinds of juicy conversations about it, and books written about it, and debates and theories and discussions. And all of this is so very different from what we practice here in the form of Dharma sharing. We're not trying to prove anything. We're just speaking from the heart. We're applying these teachings to our daily life. We're learning from one another. And embedded in that is our practice of mindful awareness as we do so. There have been, through the ages, this was an oral tradition first, and before it was written down hundreds of years after the Buddha died. Then it got written down and it changed countries, and you can imagine the amount of debate that has gone on about what was really the intent of the Buddha in these teachings. So there has been a lot of scholarly attention to this over time. And there are instances in Buddhist doctrines where it has gotten off the path because it's been like people fell in love with the raft. And the raft is its only purpose is to get us to the other shore of enlightenment, to get us onto the other shore of releasing us from our suffering. And the raft, the Dharma itself, its whole purpose is to carry people across this river. That's its proper function. But teachings that are for purely speculative purpose, well, that doesn't release people from their suffering. So true teachings, which includes those that are received in the right way, are these rafts that get us to the other shore. Teachings that are not true or that are not understood correctly will not relieve our suffering, don't get us to the other shore. And in reality, if we're caught with a misperception of, maybe the opposite of what the teaching is supposed to convey, well, then we'll never get to the other shore because now we have a belief. And we're bitten by the snake. We mishandled the Dharma and it bit us, or we haven't understood it properly. So I'd like to share with you, when I first started working with this sutra, I'm like, oh, that's what happened. I had an experience, and this happens to be with my own consumption of alcohol that I want to tell you about. And I have some hesitancy in telling you about this because I don't want any misperceptions about, well, Heather says that I have to, that's okay. No, this is my experience with alcohol. And I think that there might be things in here that help to maybe shine a light on the points that I'm trying to make. So if you're willing to take a look at this experience, maybe there's something that will apply to other experiences that you're having. So we know that the fifth mindfulness training is about right consumption. And I just read it, we have to not use alcohol or drugs or other toxic substances. When we take the 5 mindfulness trainings, teachers ask us to look at that, look at our alcohol consumption, and work with it as a practice. These are trainings, and so it's a way of beginning to have these touchstones that we come back to for deep looking and exploration. But when you've been at it a while and you are asking to be part of the core community of Plum Village, the Order of Inner Being, and you're looking at, getting one of these brown coats, well, it turns out that Thich Nhat Hanh, after I got my brown coat, became very clear that the members of the Order of Inner Being are not to consume alcohol, period. And this came about because way back when he began in the 60s, began bringing these teachings from the East to the West, he was really struck by what was happening with society and the way that alcohol was harming people and families and society at large. So this is one of those things where, there's a lot of nuance in the teachings for this, but when it comes to alcohol and the Order of Inner Being, Thich Nhat Hanh has become very, very clear, absolutely forbidden. So for years I didn't drink, and then I noticed that I was craving, and it's like, well, a little bit won't hurt or whatever, and so I would, and then I noticed that I was feeling like there was this outside authority telling me what to do, or that it was impinging upon my freedom. I had all this yada, yada, yada going on in my head. So I'd drink, and then I'd feel like, okay, that wasn't cool. I should really knock it off. And then I'd go back to not drinking, and then that would last for a while, and then I'd go back to drink. So it was like this thing that I was still working with. And then I had the opportunity to do some deep looking into what this was all about. When I was a teenager, I used to go to parties where I was the only one who wasn't drinking. You know, I was the good kid. And what ended up happening was that being the only one sober, the only one that was being the good kid, I was labeled a loser or a killjoy or a prude, or I should be not saying or, I was saying and, goody two shoes, no fun, I was excluded. You know, there's all this like stuff about it. And I noticed that as an adult, what was going on with me was that I was wanting not to be excluded, and I wanted to be fun. Well, the truth is that if you know me, I am both fun and I am not fun too. This is just the way that I am, right? And I could look at I could look at alcohol and how it works on my body and my mind. For me, I could take one sip of wine and get a headache. I had a problem with my stomach I had to take medication for. So what would happen is sometimes if I knew I'd be drinking, I'd take a pill for my stomach and a pill for my headache, and then I'd go have a drink. It's like, well, that's stupid. You know, my realization. But the bottom line was I could look at this encouragement that Thai offered of don't drink. It's not practicing right consumption. And I could see it as a raft to a shore of something I wanted more. And so suddenly, because I was able to like realize that I was no longer that teenager that needed to fit in or whatever, I was this adult that could really decide. It's like, no, the thing I want more is to let go of this habit, this indecision, and to really see what the next level for me would be without alcohol. What would that feel like? So I hadn't, previous to that point, been able to fully realize or receive the teaching on right consumption when it comes to alcohol because of my previous suffering. And the transformation that I had was that I could cross to the other shore now and practice non-harm for myself and for others. And it was like a kind of freedom that I hadn't experienced, an ease with it I had never experienced before. So this notion of nirvana is the release from attachment, just the letting go, and especially the letting go of ideas that we've been caught in. And these include the ideas of the teachings. You know, all those ideas I was having about, well, nobody's going to tell me, or it's authority, or, you know, this sounds a lot like the commandments that I used to have to follow, you know, all that kind of stuff, gone. This was just a simple invitation. Practice right consumption means don't do it. So all the teachings, whether they be on these sense pleasures or impermanence or non-self or right consumption, these are just skillful means. They're not absolute truths. Nobody's saying you can't. They're saying if you want to really go deeply into this stuff, then here's some ways to do it. So the Surangama Sutra that was written in 945 says, if someone uses a finger to point out the moon to another person, if that person takes the finger to be the moon, he will not only fail to see the moon, he will also fail to see the finger. And this was the reason why I hesitated to share with you my story about alcohol, was because I didn't want this story to be about the finger, about the pointing in the direction. I wanted you to see about the other shore and how it was where I was going. So the weightlessness and the wholesomeness of this lion's roar of letting go of the teaching that is both true and not true, especially that's not true. It isn't an intellectual process. You cannot reason your way to insight. It's not some intellectual conclusion you can draw. So Master Tai Shu, who was a Chinese teacher that lived in the 1920s, 1930s, he talked about the fact that there's an essence teaching and an image teaching. So the essence teaching is what happened when the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree and realized enlightenment. He got the essence of it. He lived it. It's not something you put into words or concepts. And the image teaching was what he had to start doing when he got up and walked to the Deer Park where other monastics were for all these different traditions. And he said, hey, I've realized enlightenment. They said, really? How? Then it came in down to concepts and words. But the concepts and words are only a shadow of the truth. You know, what I'm describing here about my experience with alcohol and that nirvana, that freedom that I got, that insight of, oh, this is it. They're just words I cannot convey to you. It's only a shadow of what the experience actually is. But we study the image teachings because the shadows lean us towards the essence of the experience that's trying to be conveyed. So it's a lot like if we follow the shadow of a tree so that we can actually meet the tree, be with the tree and experience it directly. So this sutra on knowing the better way to catch a snake is really about breaking our bonds of attachment to our ideas too. You know, that breaking the bonds of attachment to the true teachings and the teachings that aren't so true. And this, Thich Nhat Hanh says, this kind of letting go, this regular letting go and showing up again and again and afresh with what is coming for us is the foremost element of Buddhist training. This is it. This letting go, coming up again fresh. So yes, sense pleasures can be an obstacle to enlightenment. Knowledge and ideas also can be an obstacle to our practice. We call them prejudices or obstinacy, because we already know what a thing is, when indeed we don't yet know. So we have to let go of our lived experience many times. It's like climbing a ladder. You know, if we're on the 5th rung and we want to get to the 6th rung, we have to let go in order to climb up. And if we're on the 5th rung and we think that that is as high as we can get, well, then we're not going to go to the 6th rung no matter what, because we already have the idea that we're at the top. So you have to let go in order to keep moving up in enlightenment. So the invitation I would offer to you is to look at anything that you're struggling with about this practice. Anything that'd be like, oh, I don't think that's quite right, or what, or you know, whatever it is that is a little bit of a stumble for you. Because I suspect that right there in the Dharma, if you hold it lightly, it's actually a shadow of some insight that you can begin to pursue, and that it'll take you to a new place in your understanding. So I think that for me, with this experience with alcohol, you know, that kind of stuff that I was having about it, it's like, oh wait, no, that actually is what this is about. It's just holding it lightly, coming back to it again and again, looking deeply, and then seeing what the true nature of that invitation is. And, maybe it'll lead for your own enlightenment as well. So I will stop there. Thank you very much. I'd like to open the floor to Dharma sharing. I see that Lindy is with us today. Hello, Lindy. Have you been a practitioner before? Is this your first time? Okay. So with Dharma sharing, what we'll do is we'll just speak from the heart. There's no need to crosstalk. We're going to be not giving anybody advice or anything like that. We're going to speak from our direct experience. And when we'd like to speak, we'll just put our hands together and bow in. We can speak for as long as we need to have the floor. And then when we're done, we'll bow out. And as we're listening, what we're doing is we're practicing deep listening. We're not thinking about what we might want to say. We're not judging or whatever. We're just really showing up for one another to really understand what's happening in one another's hearts. And if there's no sharing, silence is also just fine too. So this is Heather bowing out. Thank you very much. And I'll also turn off the recording. Thank you.